Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world. My name is Leachko. I'm the creative director of all things media at Retail Without Boundaries.
And I'm Ellie Spearman, a graphic designer at Retail Without Boundaries, and we're here to introduce our first episode for the Retail Lounge. We thought that the best way to kick off this channel was to start a conversation amongst creatives as we dive into the retail design world.
And to kick all of this off, we wanted to bring two gentlemen in that know a lot about this world. And so we have Brian Botta, the executive creative director of Retail Without Boundaries, and Jose Docabo, and he is the executive director of client relations and development. Gentlemen, hello, welcome.
How you guys doing today? Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Yeah.
So we wanted to know a little bit about you at first, and
Sure.
then kind of dive into it. You know, Brian, if you wanted to go ahead and give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Where would you like to start? How deep do you want to go?
I'm thinking of what the love of retail, because it takes a certain person to love retail and to get into it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I like to at least start with, for the fact that I went to Syracuse, industrial design is my background, but I've always been intrigued by space. And so for me, tying industrial design into space really met its way through retail. So I worked in the architectural field for about a decade, and then I was fortunate enough to work with Dick's Sporting Goods and Petco and be on the agency side as well. So coming from both worlds, I realized that, at least for myself, what was most important was to tell people's stories authentically.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way that I could do that is working for a company like Retail Without Boundaries. And so from my perspective, you know, passionate about design, but also know that from a retail perspective, I really enjoy people interacting in environments.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd have to say, since I graduated school, for the past 20 plus years, I've been in and around the retail environment, kind of doing what we're doing today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Jose, we'd love to hear about your background a little bit.
Oh my gosh, it's way too long. But anyway, I'm a graphic designer by trade. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, and I have always been on the retail side for some crazy reason. I always thought that I would be in the agency side from the very beginning when I was in school, but it was the other way around. So 30 plus years of experience in the retail side. Worked at Home Depot, Albertsons, Scotty's, which is a local hardware in Florida. And before that, I was in the window door company, which is kind of industrial. So a little bit of everything. But yeah, very passionate about retail for some reason, and lots of experience in the different, you know, anything that you can think of in the retail side of the world and the creative side, I've done. So here I am.
Awesome.
Great to have you guys here.
So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. So I guess going into the retail world here, I think a lot of the public, when they walk into a space, they're not thinking about who designed it, who built it, what are the feelings they're, you know, being provoked out of them, you know, purposely by an agency or the retailer themselves. So if you two wanted to give me perspective on what you felt, what retail was to you and how you kind of go about it.
Sure. Do you want me to go ahead first, Jose?
Sure.
It's magic. That's all that's it.
That's
The
true.
Oh, there it
simple
is.
answer. It's
Yep.
magic. You know what? It's being simple. I think the thing is, at least from my perspective, you know, when you first come out and you get into retail, there's so many different aspects of space and understanding people and the strategy behind it. But really, I think when you have the time to get to spend time with either the customers that are out there shopping and or brands, and you start to understand their sense of purpose, and then how does that translate into how do we bring that to life in store physically? It's really just a breakdown of getting to really explore what does that look like, you know, from a lifestyle standpoint, from how products may interact with people, how does that get introduced in the retail world. And then I think us being as designers is how do we partner with whomever we're working with and bring that to life, you know,
Right.
Whether it's from a physical aspect, a digital aspect, what's happening within trends. So there's a lot that goes behind it. I mean, even for my first forte into it, I really thought it was just about the physical aspect. Hey, these are tables that get placed here, and there are things that exist on tables.
Yeah.
But the deeper that I took the dive and working with some people that were great mentors to think through, like, well, what is the brand trying to say?
Yep.
I think those were some of the like key key eye openers for myself to then think a little bit more about what is actually happening when we are in retail. So, I mean, again, from a surface level, I think that's where you start to find yourself. So people have those moments. They're attracted, they're engaged, and they have an aha moment.
Mm.
And there's a lot that goes on behind it, but if you make it simple and you make it clear and it's easy and it's beautiful, I think that's where you really start to have defining moments of where you introduce people to whatever it is that they're trying to experience from a brand and or retail standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jose, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything he's saying. I think in my perspective, all these years, what I've seen is a major change where, retail design is very much driven by the customer, right? Just like most things, but it's very important to understand the customer. And these days, data is driving a lot of the creative. And I think that's not an easy transition for a lot of designers, because a lot of the design instincts that we used to have before, that we would just design whatever we wanted, I think now we have to be more careful, and there's a lot of data driving that, and that can be sometimes limiting as a designer, because you all of a sudden all that freedom that you used to have is kind of taken away in a way, and you have to really listen to the customer and listen to the data. And I think the most successful retailers these days are those that are doing a 360, just like Brian is saying. It's not just one channel, but it's like if you walk into the store, you need to understand where that customer came from. And there is a good chance that that customer came from a mobile banner ad that they saw, whether they were on the phone or a TV spot that they saw on TV when they were watching TV. And then all of a sudden that drives that customer into the store. So I think it's a much complicated business than it used to be.
Mm.
Well, and I think to like what Jose is talking about in terms of just customer, sometimes and this goes across the board, whether or not you agree or disagree, but I always try to think customer first. Be in those shoes.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get too close, whether it's from a design perspective or if you're working with a brand and the brand is trying to display something. I think when you have that opportunity to get your mindset in the realm of, well, what would this be like if I was standing here in store and what's happening, and start to extrapolate some of that information that says like, okay, this is where we're going to find something unique or something that's important. I think for us as professionals in this industry is having that availability or ability to step back and think about it a little bit differently. And I think that allows us then to also think more like the customer, because that's where
hard to do.
Yeah, it's really,
Definitely.
really hard to do.
That's very hard to do, because people, like as designers, we love to just design what we love to design, and
Right.
then the client may not like it, and they may want you to start over.
Mm-hmm.
And like, why? That was so cool. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that.
But I think it's unique to. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jose.
Go ahead.
Take
I
the
think
floor.
it's very unique, the fact that we actually have so many tools these days to educate ourselves and our teams when it comes to design. And also, there's a lot of times, like you're saying, we may present something to a client and they may not like it, or maybe they have data that shows why they don't like it. But at the same time, you have to balance that art and science in our world. And I think that's where it becomes really, really tricky, because you still want things to be beautiful. You want things to follow the brand, but at the same time, you cannot ignore data. So it's a very interesting balance that we have these days.
Right, definitely. So I'm curious then, for the both of you, through your experiences, well, we're thinking about like this science and creative hybrid that exists in the retail space. When we're focusing on that customer journey, like what successes have you seen in the industry through your years and through your creation?
Could be like a favorite project that went really well, that was like harmonious. It
Yeah,
had everything
and like
in it.
what about it worked well?
I'm thinking.
Or that you see maybe online, maybe it's something that Nike did well, or somebody that you just like you keep thinking about it, or people design off of that.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you real quick. I mean, one that is it's not very flamboyant and is not huge, but when I was working at Home Depot, we really learned how to understand like the data that I was telling you about. So we did a lot of events, for example, like Labor Day or 4th of July, and it came to a point that all the teams and all the different areas, all the different channels came together and decide, hey, what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? And whatever that goal was, creatively, we tried to do the same thing. And it was about the best storytelling, the best photography, the best video, the best, just the look and feel. But you couldn't ignore the brand. You could not ignore the data that came from like the merchandising side of the world, saying these are the things that we need to sell. And sometimes we needed to sell like mulch. What do you say about mulch?
Yeah.
How do you photograph mulch? So those are the challenges that sometimes you have as a designer. But between the data, between all the different groups coming together, we did this beautiful, just collage of art. I mean, collage of different channels coming together. Whether it was an email, was a banner ad, whether it was a TV spot, whether it was a print ad, and you will know when you walk into the store that there was something happening, and all those channels would reflect all the same language, the same graphics, and everything you were experiencing in the store as you were experiencing online or anywhere that you went.
Mm.
I think I was going to say that as you're doing that, you allowed me to think a little bit deeper, because that was a great example. And as I was listening to you do it, sometimes I always try to come from a position of just thinking a little bit differently. And, in my past life, some of the greatest successes came from when a project was kicked off and we decided to take a route that somebody wasn't really thinking of initially.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So although we addressed their initial ask, we said, hey, by the way, but have you thought about this? Mm-hmm. And so I think some of those kind of creating a unique experience or going to a place where nobody anticipated is a success, because I believe that that's part of what we're here to do. And I will reflect on one project where a lot of it was based off of modularity and components that could grow and flex, because the client had a multitude of different areas that they were going to go in, and our opportunity was creating a whole system, for them to be able to do that no matter where they were. And it was an aha moment, because it allowed them to live in a myriad of different locations, flex accordingly, create different stories based off of regionality. Yeah. And again, it really spawned off of something that they didn't think that they needed or knew about. And I think sometimes when you hit those moments that whether it's metric driven or revenue driven, I think sometimes the success comes into finding something that's brand new that, you just didn't know you needed.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say, to add to that too, I think in the retail world, especially our team, everyone has a lot of different perspectives or pasts, other lives that they were in, that makes the way we think different. We have like a unique background of people, and we solve unique problems and create unique solutions for people. So
yeah, definitely.
Because we're looking at retail very differently than others do. So
oh yeah, that's something I've always noticed in our companies, and just the way we move our team's ideation model. We are creating this customer journey that is ultimately a subjective thing for each individual who's relating to whatever's in that space, right? But we look at it from an objective angle, and we're considering all of this data, but then we add in, I'm going to bring it back what you said earlier, this magic to it. We challenge the typical what is already in existence, and we push it beyond, and in a lot of ways it seriously helps like our customer relations and giving them an opportunity to exist in these spaces in ways they haven't before. So
what do you think when a space has too much going on in it, like an environment that it's over designed, and to somebody's eye it may not be, but stuff that it was meant in a good way, but it didn't come out successful, like in everyone's mind it thought it was going to work and it didn't. So what's that thought? Because to me, like we've heard a lot about less is more in the world, and go simple, be easy on people, make the messaging very simple, so I don't know if anyone had any perspective on that, where it's.
I think the first reaction is always to try to appreciate what is happening. I think there's that initial reaction of like, oh, this is too much, or there's too many things in here. And guess what? Sometimes it, like unbeknownst to a situation, if you walk into a store, I like to like extend it beyond. Is it within the airport or hospitality? Like, how are you thinking through these things if you kind of broaden the spectrum? And I do believe to be discerning is something that we have to bring to the table for people to want to create clarity. I think that is important. And I think, there are a couple of instances that come to mind where I can appreciate it from a design perspective, but I could also say like, they did too much, and I think it's always the learnings of like, if they did too much, is somebody confused, and that's where we don't want to be.
Right.
And maybe they're like you just said, like maybe somebody does really appreciate it, which is fine. But more often than not, like I think when there is too much going on, it starts to create a little bit of confusion, and you have to be able to know how to, what I would consider is see how that's working, and then if it isn't working well, be able to pivot from what you've done.
Yeah, I'm curious how that would be measured too. If a customer's standing in front of that kiosk for way too long,
Yeah.
or they're looking around like a deer in headlights, like where do I go next in the store? Because I think that then simplifies into where do you, in a brash way, herd the cattle
Yeah.
through the retail space and get them to go where you want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, just like everything, there is a customer for every segment, and you're going to find retailers out there and companies out there that they thrive on providing a lot of information. And when you walk into their stores, there's a lot of noise. There are other companies that they don't need to do that because it's a different type of product, and the cleaner the better. But I think at the end of the day, I think one of the things that we have to remember all the time is that customers, when they walk in the store these days, they are much more educated in terms of the product and what they're trying to get than ever before. It used to be before that you went to the store and you did a lot of the research while you were in the store. Nowadays, I think most of us do all the research online. So by the time we get to the store, there is that whole dilemma is like, do you need to put 1 million signs to get the customer to the store, to the place where they want to go, or informational, or do they just want to go in, get the stuff and get out? And I think you'll find all kinds of different segments in different types of customers that want different experiences. And, there is a lot of companies that have an app that, when you walk onto the store, they know you're in there and automatically can take you to the aisle where you can pick up the product and walk out. There is a lot of us that just like to browse around, and you might go in to buy paint, and then you come out with, with a brush, and you come in with tape, and you all of a sudden you go to the other aisle, and then you say like, oh, I want to get some plants. And it's just it's part also of the marketing machine where we're trying to create an experience and grow that basket. So I mean, I think the sky's the limit these days, and that's not a cliche. It's like the way you talk to the customer may sound like a lot, but sometimes it's not. But it depends on the customer.
I think it depends on the customer. And then it also like, hey, part of the metrics that I've experienced is sometimes, you've made the overinvestment by looking at the numbers, right? Like, hey, did it perform as well as we anticipated it? Like, there are like, maybe people aren't building as big of a basket, or there was the initial surge. And then from that surge, did it continue? Did people continue to make that investment? I think if you were looking at it from whether it's an investment standpoint or a retailer standpoint or a corporate kind of standpoint, where you are looking at those numbers week over week based off of productivity, and if you do start to see it, like, you'll quickly find out if that investment was worth it, or if you could say like, hey, we noticed that if we take some of this out, it will help it perform better. Right. So, I mean, it's like two things. It's either think that people are truly looking at the numbers to see how the performance is doing, or I think from like what Jose's saying is that, that those experiences are truly skyrocketing some of what people want to have happen when they are in retail, and it is the sky's the limit. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, when you start to talk about like metrics and things that we consider, and also even just in terms of immersive space, right? And Jose, this is something you touched on as well, which kind of makes me want to shift gears here and discuss a bit more about technology in the retail world. Obviously, right, it's the way that things are advancing, and we plan to have a further discussion and go more in depth for like the back end side of tech and retail and whatnot. But I'm curious how the two of you perceive that world, and in your own experiences, and how it's amplifying customer experience or the brand's productivity on the shelf, right?
Yeah, because the thing is, like, does a screen solve everything?
Right, that's the real question.
Sometimes
here.
Get lazy and they just put a screen on the wall, and they say that can do everything.
It's and I think the other tough part is that, like, the first when you started saying some of this stuff, my head, like, I'm old school, so I still thrive on. I'm a true believer in brick and mortar. But to like what Jose was saying earlier, there is a journey that starts to happen sooner. and that I definitely am a big believer in. Even with having, I'll bring from my own personal experience, having 2 kids that are, approaching teenage years, and in the teenage years, the things that they're doing through social media, Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, it's like that drives a lot of the influence that happens when we go shopping, and or they know it's already going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from a social media and marketing aspect, the technology that kind of already starts to dictate what's going to happen in store has become crucial. And then I think, to your point, Joe, like, yeah, I think you have to be really smart about what you're doing digitally in store, and how people are engaging in it. Throwing a screen on it is not necessarily always the answer.
It's not a Band-Aid.
It's not a Band-Aid, so it's all in unique cases. But I also believe that it's worth trying out. I think that's the other thing, is pushing people to try new things, even if it's just test stores, and whether it's screens or QR code oriented, like to create a better shopping experience or to create a better way of getting people to make decisions. I think it's worth trying, because in retail we could always back out of it.
Yeah.
We can fail and back out of it and not make too much of an investment, and know that at least we tried, and or can pivot accordingly based off of what's happening. But I think you have to try.
I would say retail's evergreen anyway.
Yeah.
So, and the best testing is to test it on the public, in an indirect way, and see how they, because to your point, you can shift the next morning and change the entire layout of the store, or the way that campaign went, how they're interacting with it. So,
I think that's where digital is going to play a huge role in the future for us. And this is why you see all these companies, especially retailers, spending so much money in retail media, because it's a huge digital movement. And the advantage with digital is that you can change it rather quickly.
Yep.
So to your point, Joe, when somebody's testing, if a company's testing, and they can literally almost see real time if it's working or not, and if it's not, you can literally shift the creative or the content, and all of a sudden you can test it, right? If it's actually working or not, the new creative, or you can be testing multiple stores at the same time with the same content. So I think that's where I think digital is going to play a huge role. I think the bigger question is, like, how much digital, what kind of digital? It's what is going to be driving in the future, like the experience in the store. And I think, there is a lot of retailers, a lot of companies that are already testing it. And but I think it's fairly new. So I think that's going to be the next big thing in my mind.
Yeah, I noticed when, during COVID, people did the buy online, pick up in store, BOPIS, what we call in the retail world, that stayed around, because even when you're in stores are still trying to drive you click-through rates on their websites. So Jose, you told me a story about your daughter who she will walk in the store, look at everything, but will not physically buy it in the store. She will go home and then she'll get that on her Instagram, or something will pop up on social media, and buy it then. So that it's crazy that is a trend, but I think you got to play both sides of that coin, when you're in the physical space.
Yeah, just like Brian is saying, I think, when you look at different generations, whether it's Gen X or Gen Z or millennials, all three groups have very, very different shopping patterns and shopping needs. And, I think this is a unique time in our lifetime where you have these very influential groups that all live together. And let's not forget the boomers. Yeah. And, all of a sudden, you have 4 different ways of approaching these customers, and there's no one shoe fits all. It just doesn't. So you have to be very aware of the fast changing environment that we are constantly exposed to with our digital media that we have these days.
I like the fact that you're just kind of making light of that story, like for the fact that she sees it, goes to the store, looks at it or tries it on, and then goes back and buys it. It's like, okay, well, the win is at least you went to the store.
She left the house.
She left the house, right? The second win is, like, at least there was a purchase. But like, that's the interesting thing, is like none of that. There's nothing along that path of purchase or journey that there's what I would consider like wrong or right. Yeah. Right. Like it is being open and receptive to all of that, so like, to me, if that's the way you're working, like, hey, how can we learn from that? Or how can we make that better? Or for my kids, it's kind of like the same thing. Like, well, how can we make what they're experiencing a little bit better? Or, it's for me, it's still tried and true. Like I'll still see things online, and I know that I'm just speaking from personal experience, but like I like to go to the stores.
Mm.
And it is just because of my background in nature, but like I do still find it enjoyable to touch, to feel, to
Yeah.
try things on, to test something out, like to know that even though I could have made that purchase online, I'm happier that I went and maybe listened to it or tried it and said, you know what, I didn't think it was what I initially anticipated.
Right.
So like there's so much to learn from that, but I still believe that like, yeah, again, maybe the spectrum is broadened because retail isn't just the physical aspect of it. It's everything that we're talking about, right?
Yep.
It's all things in terms
Yeah.
of human senses and
Yeah.
our perspective. I mean, the one thing that I keep going back to as I'm listening to the two of you discuss this and why I brought up the whole technology thing is, as retail designers, even just design in general, it is an invention in itself, right? We're focusing on, of course, the building blocks of creation, but we're considering all of these additional immersive experiences in this visual reality that we make. And withholding business and revenue and success in interaction, foot traffic through stores, retail spaces, of course, that's important. But we also, as you said in the beginning, pay attention to authenticity and integrity of our work. Whether it is physical, how do we push it beyond tech? How do we use tech or virtual screens, VR, whatever, augmented to expand that, right? And just continue to grow onward. So yeah, definitely. It's an invention.
Well, so like with that, kind of adding on that, we're creating an experience, but we're selling a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it is people mimic each other, or they see something online. People buy trends, they do things. So I don't know if you guys have seen any trends of people, how they sell lifestyles or anything like that. Or, very influential ways of doing that. Cause I know people use social media or celebrities and they do things that way, but any ways that people make immersive environments to sell a lifestyle, what are common ways people normally do that sort of stuff?
I think it's a really interesting question. My head immediately went to, this is more of the technology part of it. I mean, obviously the social aspect is that we're being paid attention to by our interaction.
Yep.
And so for however your lifestyle is the information that you're getting. So if you're active, maybe you're getting more ads that are Lululemon based or Viore based.
The algorithm.
Right, the algorithm. So I find it super intriguing because it's already catering to something that I'm energetic about or passionate about, or if it's cosmetics, et cetera, whatever that may be for yourself. I think it's then, in my mind, for at least that type of experiences, being able to get that same type of feeling and let's just say brand aesthetic that you're experiencing online, making sure that it happens in store too. Is showing up, and the level of detail that you felt in the product that was speaking to you is there when you walk in. And I think that that's something that's especially crucial. We're seeing, I would go to say we're seeing it more frequently than not, is that you're getting some of these really, really great brands that were, DTC, that are now actually creating storefronts, and they're not skipping out on making sure that their brand language is exactly what people need to experience. And I think that's, again, goes back to it. I think it's about the storytelling. It's about that investment, people understanding the purpose, and then the same seamless experience from online to when you're there is happening, and it's continuing to keep you invested in that company, in that brand,
Definitely.
and wanting to come back. Yeah.
Definitely.
Any last thoughts, Jose?
Yeah, no, I think what Brian is saying is so true. I mean, you can imagine, we know a lot of brands, right, without naming them, that created this idea that if you can't have it, you're missing out. And I think that's like the beauty of a lot of these brands. And I'm not going to say the two names of two companies that I'm thinking about right now, but I think you guys will know. During the Olympics, there was a technology company that spent a lot of millions of dollars trying to advertise their products. In fact, they were giving them away to some of the Olympians. And there was the opposite side. There was a company that didn't spend a dollar in advertising, or a lot less, let's put it that way. However, pretty much all the shots that you were seeing during the Olympics, people were holding the company that didn't pay, that they were holding a phone, there was a company that didn't pay for that. So that goes to show you the importance sometimes of branding. It's like, you're going to develop this loyalty to a brand, because what Brian's is saying is so true. Whatever you see or whatever have you seen in history of that product, no matter what time, 10 years later, 5 years later, you go to the store, you're still going to experience that same excitement of buying a new product that you already bought like 10 years ago. And you're like eager to wait for the next one that comes out. So I think the branding and the way you position these different products in different areas, whether it's in store or online, I mean, it's all driven by a sentiment, and creating that sentiment is huge these days.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies, sometimes probably laugh because they don't spend a whole lot of money, and yet people are loyal to those brands in so many ways because of the experience that they have had in the past. So I think it's all important how you reach the customer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well said to both
Yeah.
of you. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for your input today and having this conversation with us. It was fantastic. And again, to all of you out there, thanks for checking in on our first episode of the Retail Lounge. Stay tuned. And if you have any feedback for us, suggestions on topics we should cover in the future, please let us know in the comments. And
We'll see you later.
We'll see you later.
Thank you.